Almost there. Okay, we are live. Marshall, it's you and me. I'm going to unmute you, Marshall. Marshall, there, can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Well, Marshall, welcome, and thank you for joining me with this. This is the first of 10 that I have planned for the next 2 weeks. It's a lunchtime Bible study, Bible discussion, and I'll have a different speaker every week. This is being broadcast on Zoom and Facebook Live. So any comments or questions anybody has, you're welcome to utilize the Zoom comments or the Facebook comments. I'll be monitoring both. But when I put this out there, Marshall was the first one to respond. And I think Marshall, I think we first met back in 2005. I was trying to think at Pickup University, if you remember that.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I think that's the first time I remember meeting you anyway. And that was a great discussion with Harry Pickup Jr., Marty Pickup, and a bunch of other guys. And we agreed to speak in that room and never let it leave that room. I'm just going to leave it at that. That was one of the conditions. That was good stuff down at the Florida College campus. But you and I have been, I feel, good friends since then. It's been great to have you as a friend. And thank you for stepping up to this. So when I offered topics out there, generally, you decided to choose and discuss Philippians 4 through 14. I'm curious, why did you choose that during this time? What was your thinking?
Well, if you're on social media, then you see nothing but coronavirus right now. You see nothing but doom and gloom, and the numbers are pretty bad. And yeah, I mean, it is bad, and there is a lot of concern out there. And worry and anxiety has always been a human problem. Doesn't matter what the circumstance is, the cause of it, it's always going to be there. And so I think Philippians 4 is a great passage, one of many that to go to help us to assuage those worries and fears. And just some really good instructions from Paul about how we can take control of our worry by some certain specific things that we can do.
Perfect. I mean, I think it's a great topic. Looking forward to our discussion here. You and I talked behind the scenes a bit about certain things to cover, but I think it's as good a topic as any for the times we're living in, the present distress. Philippians is a great book. We happen to be teaching Philippians on our Wednesday night study for similar reasons. So if any of our members tune in, we'll be doing this in a few weeks, Lord willing, same thing. But so anyway, thanks again. Let me say a word of prayer for us before we get into our study. Let's pray together. Father in heaven, we're thankful for this wonderful opportunity we have to come together from various parts of the country and study your word. Your word is constant and your word stays pure, and it's wonderful to guide us. And it's just wonderful that we can come together, and we're encouraged by the fact that we can come together and study a portion of your word together. We ask for patience as we go out about in our communities at times like this. We ask for ways that we can be salt and light that you want us to be examples. We ask you to be with those and help us to be uplifting and encouraging to those workers that are working now, those in the service industry, those in the healthcare industry, and others, that we can be an encouragement to them as we know they are stressed out. Help us to be a light and example to them. Please bless our efforts now as we enter your word of study. It's in your son's name. Amen. Amen. I'm just going to read Philippians 4, verse 4 through 14. And then from there, Marshall will begin our discussion here. Let me read that along with us. Philippians 4, verse 4. Rejoice in the Lord always, and again I will say rejoice. Let your gentle spirit be known to all men. The Lord is near. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all comprehension, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, brethren, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is of good repute, if there's any excellence, and if anything worthy of praise, dwell on these things. The things you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things, and the God of peace will be with you. But I rejoiced in the Lord greatly, that now at last you have revived your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned before, but lacked opportunity. Not that I speak from want, for I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances I am. I know how to get along with humble means. I also know how to live in prosperity. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of being filled and going hungry, both of having abundance and suffering need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. Nevertheless, you have done well to share with me in my affliction. So before I get to the questions here, Marshall, I have for you, let me just remind, we have a few people joining us. We're going through Philippians 4 through 14. If you have any questions or comments, if you're looking at Facebook Live, feel free to type them in the comments and we'll get to them as soon as we can. So Marshall, from chapter 4, verse 4, rejoice in the Lord always, and again I say rejoice. Did you count how many times he says rejoice in this letter?
Yeah, I did. At least in what I was able to count, I may have overlooked one or two, but I counted 11 times that the word rejoice or rejoiced was used. But not only that word, but the word joy also comes up quite a bit. I counted 5 or 6 times that joy or joyous was used. So you're looking at 16, 17 times in a very short letter that word just comes shining through from the very beginning of the letter all the way to the end of the letter. It is a dominant theme of the book of Philippians.
Very good. Why do you think he's telling the Philippians to rejoice in such a short letter, considering the circumstance of where he's writing from?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, as he even explains in this particular section, he is using himself as an example to them of how they need to be. And so it's pertinent to remember that he is in prison while he's writing this. He's in Rome, and now granted, it's house arrest. It's not like he's in some deep, dark jungle, or dungeon rather. But still, he is not in the most ideal of circumstances. And of course, that was after spending 2 years in prison in Caesarea. He's not had an easy life. And he explains part of that in the first chapter of this letter. And so for him to be able to say and tell them to rejoice in the Lord always, and again, I say rejoice, and knowing the circumstances that he's writing from, and let me just make a quick application to you and me. We haven't come close to the circumstances that he was ever in. And so who are we to say we can't rejoice no matter what the circumstances are that we find ourselves in? And so he's instructing them that there is nothing that you're going to face. There is no circumstance you face that you cannot find joy. And I don't know if this is where you're going to go with this, but eventually I do want to talk about the fact that he says rejoice in the Lord and what the meaning of joy is and where we get that joy.
Where I'm going is where the Spirit takes us, so we can go wherever we want to go. But yeah, exactly. Paul is talking. So what are we to rejoice over? What can we rejoice in at this point, do you think? Our friend Mike Wilson, I think, had a great article about a week ago about the opportunities something like this may present to us. And here Paul in Philippians 1, we recall he rejoices in the fact he's preaching the Praetorian Guard, that he has an audience in front of him. And that's remarkable to me. And that says kind of shed light. But, I don't know if you saw the article by Mike Wilson or not, but it was talking about that, the opportunities that might be out there. What opportunities do you think we have now in front of us that we may not have had just a week or two ago?
Well, with our present distress of being under house arrest, so to speak, not in the same way Paul was, but still we are, for the most part, most of us are staying at home and needing to stay at home. We talked about this yesterday with our local congregation. We got on with, there was over 100 of us that got on together in the same exact format on Zoom. And we studied together and we worshiped together and we talked and we saw each other's faces. But every one of us were making comments along the lines of, it's just not the same, and we miss each other. And so one of the questions that I asked the group was, this very same type of question, and that is opportunities. What do we do like this? And several people commented, and I think that they were spot on, that this creates opportunities or forces us to do things that maybe we haven't really given much time or thought to, such as actually picking up a phone and calling and speaking to people. We don't do that much anymore. We're not. That's not our society or culture. We text, we email, we message on Facebook, but we don't actually pick up a phone and call. Well, now's a good time to do that, to strengthen those relationships with one another, check on one another. The elderly definitely don't need to be getting out, but those who are young and healthier and don't have as much chance of catching this virus, they can go and go to the grocery store for people. They can do acts of service, things. It's just making people think, I think, more about these things than maybe they have thought of before, where before we're also involved in our life and the things that are pulling us in a million different directions. Well, guess what? A lot of those things have gone away now. We can't do those things right now. And so what do? Well, let's stop looking at ourselves and let's focus on others and how we can serve others.
I think most people respond that way as well. The selflessness, looking for ways to help out. I put out email twice now to people in my community of if anybody needs help, if anybody's hunkered down, they can't get out, need groceries, need medications, let us know. Also, if you want to help with that. Well, I had about a dozen people say I can help, and I had 0 people say I need help yet. And that's just the way it is. And so I'm glad that there's many people willing to help out, that otherwise they would not have stepped up like this. But we'll see how it goes. But other opportunities, we spoke about this prior to the meeting starting up, is this almost has like a 9/11 feel to it, where I remember in my lifetime of preaching the gospel now almost 20 years full time, 2 events happened. 9/11, right after that, there was a lot of people interested in the gospel, whereas they otherwise weren't. Katrina, I was in New Orleans for Hurricane Katrina right then as well. So both of those are about a year or 2 after those events where people were like, okay, I need to take a closer look at God. I've never really done that, or maybe this is time. And so hopefully, prayerfully, maybe this is another opportunity for us. Yes. And I think that leads to verse 5. Let's read verse 5 here. It says, let your gentle spirit be known to all men. The Lord is near. So my NASB reads gentle spirit. The ESV reads sweet reasonableness. I love the idea of sweet reasonableness. So we are to have a gentle spirit. We are to be, as it says in ESV, sweetly reasonable. What do you think that looks like?
Well, when you consider the original context first, and then let's make some application to that to our present distress. But the original context, of course, you've got, there were the opponents of Christianity that more so than what you and I face today. But you've got the opponents, which, as he mentions in previous chapter, is mainly going to be the unbelieving Jews. Those are the circumcision or the mutilation, as he says there in that chapter. But of course, you're going to have even the pagans, that the general populace who are going to be against Christianity as well. And so it's extremely important that in that crucible that they found themselves in their time, that they had the demeanor and the character that would present itself in a very Christ-like way. So you cannot respond to your opponents in an angry, harsh way. You cannot respond, to use the opposite of the ESV, in an unreasonable way, or as the New King James says, gentleness. You cannot be, what is the opposite of gentle? Harsh, I guess. But say again?
Dismissive, maybe?
Yes, dismissive. You've got to be able to speak kindly and treat everyone with kindness, especially those whom you disagree with. And even just a couple of verses prior, in verse 2 and 3, he mentions 2, what most people think are women there. Well, I mean, he does say that they are women, but these 2 women who are having some type of disagreement. So it's not just with those that are outside, it's even with those who are inside. And when you're going through a trial, a hard time, regardless of the circumstance, that can sometimes boil over and everybody's on edge. Well, relax. He's telling everybody here, chill out. God is here. The Lord is at hand. He's going to take care of everything. And so you have a responsibility to be reasonable, to be gentle, to be sweet with everyone. I tell my kids all the time, there's sibling rivalry, sibling conflict, and so forth. And they want to point their fingers at the other person. I said, you know what? It doesn't matter what they're doing. You still have a responsibility to speak in a certain way, to act in a certain way. Doesn't matter if they are not being reasonable or if they're not being sweet or gentle. You still have the responsibility. And I think that's what Paul is saying here.
Right. Very good. Yeah. Rejoice, be happy. There's so much to be happy about. There's so much to rejoice about, even though I'm in prison. And even though you have 2 sisters at each other, you've got these external, probably Judaizing teachers, chapter 3, 1 and 2 at your throats. Right. And there's so much to rejoice and be happy about. I'm going to read a comment real quick from a Sarah Simmons on Facebook. She says, this is our time to slow down and take care of family, brethren, and others. At least we have the technology to stay connected much better. At least we do have the time to reflect, connect with God and others better instead of rushing through life without time. And I think that's spot on about some of the contentment that he's going to speak about
Oh, yeah.
here. We're going to speak about later
Hey,
on.
Sarah, good to see you online.
One thing I think about the gentle spirit as reasonableness, and you touched on this, is the fact that I believe we have to be approachable. Now, we live in a time when you can disagree with somebody over, let's say, same-sex marriage, and somebody's going to call you a hater and everything else. And our job is to say, look, we can disagree and still love you and still like you. It's just that this is that time we live in. But I think we really have to go out of our way to show we can be approachable. We can have a reasonable discussion without shouting them down, or hopefully we're going to be dismissed, I think, more than we're going to dismiss them. But I think we really have to go out of our way to show we can be in the same room and shake hands and everything else with anybody of any lifestyle and reach out. It's that Romans 12:17 passage to me. We need to respect what is right in the sight of all men. That does not mean we agree with all that's right, but we can respect it. And that's important for us to do. It doesn't mean we're going to have a disagreement, because obviously we disagree with them or they disagree with us.
Right.
But we can be gentle in our spirit. We can be sweetly reasonable as we go about those things. And that's important. So I'm really happy to hear you touch on that. That's one thing we can touch on.
Well,
Let's go ahead.
And let me play off what you said too about the post 9/11 effect, so to speak. It is. I am seeing this that there are people who are having that renewed interest in spiritual matters, and it is crucial that we have the right type of attitude, so that we will help to attract people to Christ. And the demeanor that we have, I mean, it's either going to turn people off or it's going to help them see Christ. And at this time, and with this technology, where we can reach people that maybe we wouldn't have reached before, we need to use that and be careful with how we're presenting ourselves and presenting the gospel.
And there will be some out there, you and I know this, and I'll just make this comparison. I think it's funny because I have a secular friends that I joke with and talk to. We have a very good relationship, and they'll look at Christians and ask me to explain it, and I'll say, look, I can't explain what some people do in the name of Christ. There's just I'll just say outrageous things that people do, but please don't lump all Christians into that, and they don't. But let me just point it right back to you. I mean, I live in the greater Portland, Oregon area, as if there's no craziness around here. I've seen people with gas masks and goggles on and about 50 cases of toilet paper walking down the streets. And I'll say, that's not you, is it? Oh, no. Well, listen, this kind of, this outrageous reaction it's human nature for some. But what we want to do, obviously, is focus on the word of God, not the way people might act or react. And you and I best do that by being reasonable or approachable, as I put it. And there's crazies on all sides, not just in the religious realm. We don't have a market on that by any means, but it's important that we take advantage of times like this when people are looking. We want to be that go-to person. Hopefully relationships are built, and if they have a question about Bible things, they're going to go to you, Marshall, because they know you as a friend and trust you. So you have to be bitter with them.
Exactly right. And when people are thinking about their own mortality, then these questions about God are going to come up. We need to be ready, and we need to have, of course, we need to have already been a certain way and had a certain disposition to where people will come to us. But still, we need to, going forward, be ready to talk.
Before we get to verse 6, let me read a comment by Randy Berry on Facebook. He says, it's a great time to speak to our neighbors about the gospel. Yesterday, he spent some time with his unbelieving neighbors about God, which he normally would not have had the opportunities. So, yeah. Amen. That's what we're here for. So very good. Okay, let's move on to verse 6. Verse 6 says, be anxious for nothing. Okay, verse 6. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. Okay, Marsh, I'm looking for the definitive answer here on be anxious for nothing, because that's always a big one. Are we never to be anxious? Are we never to be concerned about things like coronavirus or anything else? Food's going out of the supermarkets for weeks. Are we to not be anxious?
Yeah.
How do you explain this, please? Because I have no idea what this is.
Oh, well, we're here to solve all the problems, all the world's, all the answers, religious answers today, right? Well, first of all, we need to remember that worry is a human emotion, and we were created with certain emotions. And you can even use other emotions and feelings such as anger. That's a God-given emotion. All of these emotions that we feel, it's not that the emotions themselves, the feelings themselves are wrong and that we cannot feel these things, and shame on us if we feel these things. It's how we handle them, how we channel them, what we do with them. That's what Paul is getting at here. And so he's not saying don't ever worry or it's wrong for you to worry, but rather, okay, look, if you're gonna have this concern, don't let it overwhelm you. You've got to channel it. You've got to do something positive with it. And that's what he then goes on to explain in the next few verses.
Very good. Yeah, it's I don't panic very much. I'm a pretty cool cucumber, but later on I'll worry about it and miss sleep as I think about it. But yeah, this talks about the reaction to things. When I don't panic, I do what helps me free from anxiety, I think, is right in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 6:25, and the birds and the lilies, how they're taken care of. And my good friend David Posey said this one time: birds and lilies don't have panic attacks. There's a good reason why they don't. They know where they're getting their source from, and that's always helped me with this. But this verse, I think you nailed it, is what do we do with the anxiety? We can go to the bottle, we can go to drugs, we can go to other hobbies, other vices, or verse 6, we can everything by prayer. That's what we're supposed to do with these things. Talk to God about it and let your requests be made known to God, but do it with thanksgiving. There's a kind of a synonym or sister word to gratitude. So be happy, be thankful for what you had, take inventory. I had one time an assignment in a Bible class when I was a new Christian. You got a week to go home, everybody in class to just write down their blessings every time you think of one. So everybody came back with like 18 pages or something of blessings we could think of. Because when you sit down and count your blessings, that's going to put you, I think, in a proper mindset. And that's kind of what verse 8 we'll get there in just a moment about really helping us to have the proper mindset on these things.
And when you take it to God, when you let your request be made known to God, what you're doing at that point is you're turning it over to him, and you're letting him worry about all those things. Not in the sense that he's anxious, but you're letting him handle it. And that's what he's saying here in verse 6 is you don't have to handle it because God is the one that's handling it. At the end of verse 5, he says, the Lord is at hand. Now, there's a couple of ways you can take that. I think probably what he has in mind for the most part, which kind of goes back to the end of chapter 3, and that is that God's going to set everything right. He is going to vindicate us. He is going to make everything just. It may not happen in our lifetime, but God is coming back. Jesus is coming back, and everything will be made right. And so with that in mind, that should bring peace. But not only that, it may also be that what he means here when he says the Lord is at hand is literally he's near. I mean, he knows what's going on. He sees it. He feels it. He knows what is concerning you. So turn it over to him. Let him take care of it. And I think your allusion to Matthew 6 is a great one because that's the same point Jesus is making there. You don't have to worry about what you're going to eat. You don't have to worry about what you're going to wear. You don't have to worry about your 401k tanking at this time. I haven't even bothered to look at mine or my kids' college funds because I know it's not going to be good. Does that present some worry? Well, yeah. I mean, I'm not crazy about it. I'm not happy about it, but are we going to be okay? Yeah. I mean, God's promise is that we're going to be okay.
Right. Very good. Let's talk about the mindset we should have. I'm going to jump to verse 8 and 9. Whatever is true, honorable, right, pure, lovely, good repute, any excellence, worthy of praise. This is you to dwell on those things. And whatever you learn, receive, heard, seen in me, practice these things. It's just a great verse to stand alone by itself. One of the things there it tells me there is, we are to know these things. A lot of times I'll do this in a Bible class and I'll say, give me some attributes of what a Christian should be. And you get about 30 answers, humble and prayerful and service towards others. And then the next question is, well, we all know the answer, but are we doing these things? We need to put this into action. And I think that's what verses 8 and 9 begs us to do. We know what we are to do. It's easy to talk about what is true and what is honorable and what is right and lovely. Although I'd like to hear you talk an hour about what is lovely. That'd be kind of funny, Marshall. But we are to dwell on these things. That's what we're supposed to focus on, and not just dwell it and focus on it, but we're to to do those things. And I don't know if you have anything on that, but that's sort of a filtering process that and I don't always do good at this, but any movie I watch or video game I play or any discussion, it's kind of good to run through this filter of 4 verse 8, because that's what I'm filling my heart up with. And what I fill my heart up with, it's going to come out of my mouth and how I speak and how I handle and treat others. And again, if I'm unclear about that, it's just good to run through the latest Star Wars movie through that filter or anything else, or not to pick on Star Wars or anything else. But I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. There are many applications of this verse, and you've touched on some. To bring it to a what I think would be the immediate context, and then expound out from there. Whatever the distress was that they would be facing. I mean, there's negative things you can focus on. If you're anxious, if you're worried, if you're focusing on the negative things and what can happen or what may happen, or look at what they're doing over here, or look at what they're saying about us and doing to us. Well, how does that benefit anybody? It doesn't benefit you. It just brings you down. It brings everybody else down. That's not edifying. No, you need to focus on the positive. Look at all the good things. And of course, the rejoicing is in the Lord. Joy does not come from the externals. Joy comes from the internals. Joy comes from the things that God can provide. And so regardless of the external circumstances, regardless of what we're facing in life, we need to find those things that are true, honorable, just, pure, lovely, commendable, of excellence, and worthy of praise. Well, where is that going to be found? It's not going to be found in the world. It's going to be found with God. It's going to be found in the things of God. Now, expound that out to further applications. And this is absolutely a verse that I go to all the time when I am making entertainment choices, and when I am teaching on entertainment choices, and when I'm trying to train my children to make good entertainment choices. If this is not something that's going to promote these type of thoughts, if it's going to take away from godliness, then why are we filling our minds with it? Why would we involve ourselves in anything that is going to be contrary to what this verse lists here?
Right.
I just don't see a point in it and a need in it. It's not going to be uplifting or edifying. It's going to negatively affect us. And those people who say, well, that stuff doesn't bother me, I disagree wholeheartedly.
Yeah,
it should.
It doesn't affect you. Exactly. It does not be in denial.
Right. It should bother you. And if it doesn't bother you, then maybe your conscience is seared and you need to reevaluate some things.
Let me give a couple comments, shout outs to Facebook. Randy Berry says the term worry and should we be worried or have concerns. There's a difference between those two words. And that's great, Randy, for the reminder. Ron Lister, a friend of mine about an hour south of us, says, I know you're reading from, but you may want to mention the book. Thank you, Ron. That's a good reminder. We're reading from Philippians 4, verses 4 through 14. And there we go. Layla Maggard has, this is the lens which the world sees God. So important. We can dwell on these things. If we're angry and bitter, then that's how the world will see us. And that goes to our reasonableness and the things we spoke about before. So very good. So verse 8 and 9 talks about true lovely. That's how we should view things and then practice those things. But this is what's going to help make us to be content. And that's going to lead us to the next section, verses 10 through 12. Verse 4 started with rejoice. Verse 10, but I rejoice. So in between are the details. And we rejoice by turning everything over to God. Verse 6, by, I think, a right mindset. I'll summarize it that way in verse 8. Let's now talk about being content. And I think this is the meat of the lesson, in my opinion, verses 10 through 12. He says, I rejoiced in the Lord greatly now that at last you revived your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned before, but you lacked opportunity. Not that I speak from one, I've learned to be content in whatever circumstance I am. I know how to get along with humble means. I know how to live in prosperity. And in every circumstance, I learned the secret of being filled and going hungry, and having abundance and suffering need. So this is, maybe it's only me, but I struggle with being content. And maybe that's only me. I don't think so. Right. But here's some of the solutions to being content. And I've learned this again, rejoicing in verse 4, praying in verse 8. Again, the right mindset in verse 8 again. Let me go back to a comment that was made by on Facebook. by Megan Hager. She talked about the contentment, about what not is contentment, and that's from the book of Esther, and what led Haman to be so unhappy with things. And when she said that, I'm just going to read a verse that came to mind, Esther chapter 5. And in verse 11, he says, Haman had his glory of riches, the number of his sons instance. They magnified him. He promoted him. You think life is going great. But Marshall, you said something about the world is not where you get happiness. Here's a man named Haman, who has all the things in the world, but it says in Esther 5 and verse 13, I'm not satisfied. I see Mordecai sitting in the king's gates. So he had seemingly everything, almost like a touch to the book of Ecclesiastes. He had everything,
Ecclesiastes too.
but he's not happy. He's not content. And that's so common of many of us. But here Paul says, I'm in prison preaching the gospel, and my people are struggling. There's internal problems, external problems at Philippi, but I can be content. And here's how. So Marshall, here's my $1 million question to you. How do we learn this contentment? I gave a couple answers myself from the text, but did I steal your thunder away? I hope I did it.
No, it's fine. Well, first of all, let me just comment on this, and that is that contentment does take learning. It's not something that comes natural to us. All you got to do is look at little kids, and you see very quickly, it's just in our human nature that we are not content. I'll give you an example from our own family. When my sons, Penn and Jonathan, they're twins, as you know, you know them well. When they were toddlers, or even before they were walking, we had the bright idea, me and Lisa, and I'm using that term bright idea sarcastically, to get 2 of everything. So toys, we got 2 of everything. That way, they can each have one and they're not going to fight over it, right? Wrong. Jonathan could have the exact same thing in his hand that Penn had in his hand. He would put down his and go over and take Penn's. It's like, come on, you've got it right there. Why do you need his? But contentment is not something that comes natural to us. And so contentment has to be learned. Well, how do you learn it is the question that you're asking. And that goes back to what we were saying, that, well, it depends upon what it is that you're going to derive joy from. If you're going to focus on the material things, if you're going to focus on the things of the world and those things that bring happiness, and they do bring happiness. I mean, there are things, material things that bring happiness. We understand that. But as the writer of Ecclesiastes says, that's not where the true joy is going to be found. You mentioned Esther, but Solomon and Ecclesiastes too, same point. I had everything, but what was it all for? And so contentment cannot be found in the things of the world. And so when you take the context of Philippians 4 here, where is it found? It's in the Lord. It's in the blessings that he has given. It's in the peace that he can bring to us when we pray and when we meditate on those honorable things. That's where contentment is found. It's in the promises of God. That's where contentment is found. It's not in how big your house is. It's not in how many cars you have or what car you have. It's not in how many clothes you have. It's not in how much is in the bank account. It's not in worrying about your 401k or your retirement. That's not where contentment is found. It's in knowing that there is something so much greater than all of that. That's where we need to focus our life on.
My guess is having twins gives you a psychology degree in human behavior.
Well, I have failed that psychology because everything I thought I knew. No.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Scratch that. And that's one of the qualifications for elders, I think, for that reason, the humbling effect it can be to raise children just in general. As well.
Yeah, I see that Cam Lowe gave a thumbs up. I would love for him and his twin brother, to comment here on that feature.
No, we don't need to hear from the Lowe brothers at all. I've had enough of those guys. No, I know them very well. They're good friends. They need to come out for another soccer game is what they need to do. Anyway, what you said, I think it's a mindset. It's a reward. It's in the Lord. And you accurately, I think, well described that. I'm just going to add this verse and just listen. 2 Timothy 4:18, another letter by Paul. Paul said this, the Lord will rescue me from every evil deed and will bring me safely to his heavenly kingdom. To him be the glory forever and ever. And I think it's that spiritual mindset. Whatever evil deed God's going to rescue me that we find ourselves in, and he'll bring me into heaven. It's that idea that we are not citizens of this world. We're citizens of heaven trying to get through this world that helps bring this contentment that Paul is talking about. It's not the
Absolutely.
circumstances, not the stuff we have. And you said that very well. So,
And even another letter that he wrote, the first letter to Timothy in 1 Timothy 6 and verse 8. I mean, how many of us would agree to this statement? And having food and clothing, with these we shall be content. Really? Food and clothing?
that's all, right? Yeah.
That's pretty limited, isn't it?
That's all. That's all. Yep.
How can we be content with that? Well, we have to be.
There's not enough toilet paper on the shelves right now. People are going to be content.
He doesn't mention toilet paper, so
there's other ways too. So anyway,
right. Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to verse 13. I can do all things through him who strengthened me. Does that really mean we can just do anything? Or my days of wanting to be an NBA superstar well behind me? Or can I do all things through God if he just strengthens me a little more here?
So this is one of the most taken out of context and misapplied passages of the entire New Testament. In fact, once we start assembling again at the building and resume normal activities, I had already prepared to have a series of lessons on the most misapplied or misunderstood passages, and this is one that makes the list. Philippians 4:13. Again, you got to look at the context. You got to see, what is he talking about? Well, he's saying that it doesn't matter what circumstance he's in, he's going to be okay because God's taking care of him. I mean, if you boil it down to this most simple form, that's it. He gets his strength not from the world, not from what he does, not from what he can do, not from the good circumstances that he would find himself in. He gets his strength from Jesus. And it doesn't matter, as you mentioned a while ago, it doesn't matter if he's in prison. He's going to keep doing what he knows that he needs to do. He's got these opportunities, like with the Praetorian Guard, that he would have never had before. So he can keep on keeping on. So regardless of the circumstance, he can do what he needs to do in Christ. It's not about making the NBA. It's not about any circumstance you find yourself or any desire you have. You can do it. No, that's not what he's talking about.
I agree. I can do all things through him. The context is the ability to suffer through the things he's going through.
Yes.
We can get through these things in prison, the issues at Philippi, the internal, the external struggles. We can get through this, not be an NBA superstar at the age of 49 for the first time in his career, this type of thing. Exactly right. Context helps with that, and that's easily taken out, but it's good for us to put it back into context. We're going to get through this. And if anything, our history shows that 9/11 or Katrina or anything else we've been through. I mean, it's not the first time the world's had a plague. As a history guy, bubonic plague killed about a third of Europe. Terrible thing in the 1600s. Other things have happened that way, and the world is still here. Now, the question I get from my secular friends in a semi-serious, semi-joking way is this the end of the world? And the answer I always give them is we don't know. It's that thief in the night, and the question that the Bible gives us is really, are you ready for that? Right. It may happen 10 minutes from now, it may happen 10,000 years from now. We don't know, but if anything draws you closer to God, these things are here. God will send plagues at times. I wouldn't put it past God, but we don't know. But what's your reaction to this? Let's not be fearful. Let's just, with contentment, as Paul speaks about here, we know where we're going, and we know the outcome of our lives. But do you know the outcome of your life? Are you getting ready? And that's the in the Lord part that I think you wanted to share a little bit. Let's go to verse 14. I'm sorry, she has something else, Marshall.
No, I was just going to say one other thing about that, and that is, frankly, it doesn't matter whether we have a bunch or whether we have a little. That's his point. It does not matter. What matters is what comes later. And so he's learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need, he says. And the secret, of course, is that putting that trust in God, that peace that comes through God, it doesn't matter. No need to try to keep up with the Joneses.
Right. Very good. Final verse of our study, verse 14. You have done well to share with me in my affliction. The word sharing there is close to that word in chapter 1 and verse 5, and fellowship or participation. In what way are they in fellowship? I don't see them going to a fellowship, Paul, but in what way are they in fellowship with each other?
Well, Philippians is a big thank you letter from Paul. And as now you're stopping with verse 14, but if you were to keep going, you would see that he's talking about the monetary gift that they had provided for Paul to support him in his work. And he goes on to say that they have been behind him financially on more than one occasion. And what I find impressive about that is that when you look at 2 Corinthians chapter 8, that when he is discussing with the Corinthians about the collection for the needy saints in Jerusalem, what we typically call the Jerusalem collection, that it was the Philippians, or the Macedonians, he calls it there, which would include the Philippians, that in their poverty, that they were very, very liberal in their giving. In fact, Paul didn't even want to ask them. He had not asked them to contribute because he knew their financial situation, and yet they begged him to be a part of that. So look at the trouble they're going through. They have these Judaizing teachers that we talked about. They have the world at large who is against Christianity. They are in poverty. They are not a rich people. And look at what they're doing. They are sharing with Paul. They are sharing with the saints in Jerusalem. They've got their priorities straight.
Very good. The sharing,
they are content. They are content.
Very good. The sharing is on different levels. The one is the money that they've been sending. I think Lydia and her household, and being a seller of purple fabrics in Philippi 10 years ago. And whenever the X16, I think, is about 10 years before Philippians was written. There's that aspect, but also the struggle. If we get a letter from, if you and I went to China for now and to go preach the gospel, and we got arrested and thrown in jail, and we're sending letters back, hey, everybody rejoice in Gardendale where you are, or Vancouver, Washington where I am. Hey, you guys rejoice, and we're having success here. I know you're concerned for us, but
right.
That might light a fire in people in Gardendale and Vancouver to say, if they can preach the gospel in a prison, we can do it here with our freedoms here. So there's that sharing of that struggle as well. There's concern for each other, mutual edification. There's a lot of ways that we are in fellowship, sharing with each other. And it's
they're not the ones physically preaching the gospel where Paul is, but they are participating in that work. And it's very much their work as well.
They're very much part of the job. Exactly right. And that's encouraging. They want to see how it's going. That's a thank you. That's Epaphroditus being sent instead of Timothy. Here's to the point of death. He's sending this letter to you. But listen, that's another encouragement as well. And if he can do that to the point of death, what do we do when we're not near the point of death? What's our reason or excuse not to go preach or be an example to others? It's just a great, great thing. Okay, I have one more application question I'm going to ask you. But before that, do you have anything else to wrap this up? Or did I miss anything that you wanted to touch on?
No, well, I would like to just bring in one other passage that that I think is applicable here with this contentment and the idea of anxiety and letting God handle everything. And that is 1 Peter 5, which makes a similar point. In verse 7 there, Peter says, casting all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. And then, of course, there are many Psalms. In fact, I think that Peter is probably drawing from Psalm 37 and Psalm 55 in that language, especially Psalm 55 and verse 22. Cast your burden on the Lord and he will sustain you. He will never permit the righteous to be moved. There are no promises in the scriptures that everything physically will be just fine. Right. But God knows who are his, and he is going to take care of those who are his. He is going to make sure that they are sustained, number one, spiritually. But as David said in Psalm 37, I have been old, I have been young, and now I am old, but I've never seen the righteous forsaken or begging bread. So we have to learn that contentment, trusting God for his promises to come through.
I'm going to show you I'm a forgiving person, because Thursday my talk with Jody Broyles will be on 1 Peter. So don't you dare.
That was just a primer for that, is what that was. That was a teaser.
What you just said. I understand how sermons go week to week. It's very good. My final question, I actually posted this on Facebook. I'm going to read yours, and I'll get one of yours or a couple of yours. That I think the application question I want to just end the study with is, what are some of the things we are thankful for? And one of them by Ron Lister. He says, we're doing a great job. Thank you, Ron. Okay, Leela Maggart says, I'm thankful this time with my children without the bustle of a set schedule. I'm thankful for my husband. 2 weeks off, spend time with us. Company will still pay him. That is a blessing. Diane Jensen Caudell, the God who is in control. Another person wrote about opportunities to preach. Looking at chat, From Karen Johnson, thank you, Marshall. The study, please tell Lisa hello. Very good. Okay, I think it's just a good time, maybe applications as to what are we thankful for, and this will lead to us rejoicing. What do you got, Marshall?
Thankful for opportunities. Thankful for opportunities to learn new things and do things differently than we've done before. We touched on ways to share the gospel that we've never really done before. At least not me personally. I know there's been a lot of people, a lot of preachers who do live streaming and so forth. I've never done that and had never really gotten into that. Well, now's an opportunity for me to use this technology and invite people in and reach out to those people that we haven't been able to reach out to before. Being confined with each other, well, that's an opportunity for gentleness that we talked about before, and patience, and gentleness to learn contentment. I mean, this really is an opportunity to learn contentment. Yeah. We're being forced to. So I'm thankful for those times that will stretch me and be uncomfortable for me, because that's when you grow. That's
true. Pain, the trials make you better. James 1 verses 2 and following. And that's just the way to look at it. So, very good. Hey, I'm thankful for you. Thankful for the senior smiling face and for all the comments. We had a number of people jumping on Facebook. I was really happy to see that. And just another opportunity to get some spiritual food in a time when the news headlines are not that great, but it's just a great way to connect with so many others. Corey says, I appreciate the way God ties thankfulness and contentment together. So that's very good. Listen, Marshall, I thank you for your time. This has been great. I'm edified and encouraged to see you. So thank you very much for participating here. Yeah, thanks for having me. It was good to be with you. Good to see you again, and good to see you too, Corey and Karen. I'm going to shut off Facebook Live. So let me just stop the live stream. Goodbye, Facebook. Go and wave bye to Facebook, Marshall. There we go.